Hello, everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending when you're joining us. Welcome to Wisdom Wednesdays. So happy you're here with us. As folks are getting settled in, I like to ensure that to share a few reminders to make sure you're having the most supportive experience with you today. So for those of us who absorb information in various forms, I like to highlight the closed captioning button on the right-hand side of your screen. You'll also be provided a live transcript in our resource library after the event. However, if you are looking for special resources to enhance your learning in this space, please private message me and I would love to make any accommodations in the future to make sure it reaches you fully. I love to engage with all of you, so please use the comment section below so we can hear from you. And if you have any questions for our wonderful guest today, we can ensure that we get those questions answered for you. I also love to ask for grace and love for life. Although we're in these virtual environments we've been in this what feels like forever, but for a long time, we still never know what's going to happen with our technology or just the sounds around us. So I do just ask for grace and love if we need to make some adjustments. And lastly, I do like to ensure that we are as transparent as possible, although our guests and myself are always sharing advice and thoughts and wisdom from informed sources and our own lived experiences. Please be aware that our information around well-being is not a substitute to professional medical advice or a one-size-fits-all. Instead, we hope this conversation can inspire you to reflect deeper about what is or is not working for you so you can find practices that serve you as a full human being. All right. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome once again to Wisdom Wednesdays. I am Manuela Contreras, your host. And before we jump into our conversation, I like to start every conversation with a gentle grounding exercise so we can be fully present in today. So wherever you are joining us from, if it's live right now or in the recording, I invite you to just take a moment to join me in this breathing exercise. So please place your feet firmly on the ground. Either get settled into your chair or wherever feels best for you. And then I invite you to place your hands anywhere you feel most comfortable, it being on your heart, on your lap. We're going to engage in some 3 deep breaths where our exhale is going to be longer than our inhale. So as you get settled in, if you feel comfortable to do so, to close your eyes. And we're going to take a deep breath in through our nose, breathing in, 1, 2, 3, holding the breath, and then releasing through your mouth, 4, 3, 2, 1. Once again, breathing in through your nose, 1, 2, 3, 4, holding the breath, and releasing 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Last breath in through your nose. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Holding the breath and releasing through your mouth. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Gently releasing your hands down, bowing down to honor yourself for being here today, and then gently opening your eyes and joining us back in this space. Thank you, thank you. Thank you, May, for joining us. And thank you for those of you that engage. We know that it's a busy time and there's always an excuse to be in the urgency of going. But these conversations, I hope, can be a space for us to settle down for a bit and be here together. So welcome back. Again, I'm Manuela Contreras. I'm the founder, Chief Inspiration Officer of Fuerza Experiences. She, her, ella. I'm a Latina woman with brown hair, brown eyes, wearing brown square glasses, a yellow shirt today, green beaded hoops made from artisanal artists in Colombia, and a black headset. So you can hear me. I'm sitting in front of a virtual cream background with eucalyptus branches on the left side and the Con Fuerza logo on the right side with the hashtag Wisdom Wednesdays. I want to share that my intention for creating this space is really intended to inspire you to think differently about how we work. So when we're doing the work that we're deeply passionate about, we can continue to keep ourselves whole. In a world that honors and holds space and holds the written word to the highest degree, I've always been inspired by storytelling and how various cultures and traditions around the world and in history have shared knowledge through community conversations. And although we respect the abundance of books and written tools in our world, these conversations are intended to honor our heritages and our ancestors who shared wisdom through storytelling and community idea exchange. These are for the learners who grow by doing, listening, and visualizing. This space is for you. So thank you for being here. I'm excited to engage in this nurturing conversation with May Leong. May, welcome to this space. Welcome to Wisdom Wednesdays.
Thank you for having me. I'm going to also give a visual description. I'm an Asian woman with black and gray hair, wearing a gray collarless shirt with silver sparkly sleeves. I have earrings on that are made of Italian beads made by a female artist who's a dear friend of mine. I'm also have white headphones on, and I'm sitting in front of a virtual cream background with eucalyptus branches on the left and the Fuerza Experiences logo on the right side with the hashtag Wisdom Wednesday Speaker. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, May. I'm so honored to be in conversation with you. So all of our speakers are so special, and I love to give space for you to share a bit about your journey, May. What brought you here? What called you to want to engage in this conversation with me that centers our purpose and our well-being?
Great. Thank you so much for that question. I am in the phase of life where I'm semi-retired, semi meaning that I do coaching work and consulting work. And I feel like along the way, I've learned a lot of lessons, experienced a lot of highs and lows. And part of my personal mission, which I've discovered along the way, is basically promoting global citizenship on the local level. So being in conversation about trust and psychological safety in the workspace is very, very important to me, as much as I can to do my part to help lift up or share and encourage others to create safer spaces for people. And authentic ways to build trust. Those are the things that I'm really passionate about.
Oh, thank you. Well, I'm excited for folks to hear your wisdom in these topics. And I do like to name, when we're speaking on conversations about building trust and building safety, and I want to name the reason why I called out psychological safety in our title and centered us around that is because when we're talking about building safety in our communities, especially when we're working with marginalized communities, to share that we can build safety for everyone is unjust and unfair for many people who have experienced the oppression of our countries and our different work cultures. You may never feel fully safe. So for leaders that are joining this conversation with the intention of building an environment that is all encompassing safety, I just want to encourage you to be aware that that may never happen because we cannot embody and fully understand the lived experiences of our team members. And so when we say that we're fully creating safety, it's in a way being unauthentic and unloyal to really what that means. And so I like to use language that is saying safe enough, that we are building a space that is safe enough for someone to be called in to share and talk and maybe bring a piece of themselves that they feel comfortable to. In theory, in racial equity theory spaces, there's also conversation around maybe it's not about a safe space, but instead a brave space. And resources around creating brave spaces will also be available on the resource library. So we just wanted to acknowledge that in this conversation and make sure that we're fully present in what we're trying to do here. So to ground us in that, May, too, like what would you define as trust and psychological safety in the context of your experience as well?
Sure. Trust to me is having the type of relationship with your team members, with your supervisor, whoever the leaders are in your organization or project that you're working with, where you feel that you can have hard conversations, or where you feel that you can find allies to help you have those hard conversations. So that to me is the idea of building trust. Trust is not something that is only on one person's shoulder. It is something that is shared. You either are creating a community or an atmosphere where you have trust, or you are perpetuating a community where there is no trust. And the second part about psychological safety, when we do our work, when we come in to the office, virtual office, to me, having agency is having the power to be able to say something that you need to say, question something that you need to question. And I also want to touch on there's a difference between safety and vulnerability. The two overlap and the two are very distinct. And we'll talk about that as we go on in this conversation. But I want to call out the difference between being vulnerable and being safe. I think in the workplace, it's very, very difficult to be vulnerable. I think to truly be vulnerable with trust, I think in the workspace, all of us are vulnerable to different degrees. So what I talk about safety here is basically trying to find common ground, whether it's with your supervisor for what kind of talks you have, either one-on-one or whatever talks you have in a community, whether it's with your teammates, because sometimes different people have different expectations. For example, if Manuela were someone I reported to, and in a team meeting, I called her out when I could have saved that for a one-on-one conversation. That's where you have a problem with trust, and that's where you have a problem with safety. So,
Yeah, no, I love that, May. I think you bring up such a great point around what I hear you say is assumptions. A lot of leaders go into no matter how much of experience you've had in the field, or maybe you're an expert in a certain topic, and that's why you've reached that level of managing a team. Sometimes we, when we're in those positions, we very fall back to those assumptions of, oh, I've lived that. I've been in that position. So I understand. Yet, even if you share the same identities, the same gender, race, sexual orientation, different forms, you may share different identities. That will never mean that you have the same experiences or that you may be sharing the same thoughts or expectations. And so, as leaders that are deeply trying to think about, well, what can I how can I even start this process? How can I even begin to think about what it means to build trust and psychological safety? I just want to call out what you said there of not going in with assumptions and thinking that you understand that, instead really asking what's important of them. And that's so important. So you talked a bit about the teams and the individuals, and what is the difference of being able to build that trust and safety with your colleagues, and what does that look like as a team leader? What is the difference between being part of the team versus really leading and
sure.
being an example to others on the
Yeah,
team?
sure. I'll give you a great example of that. When I was a new leader of a team, in one of our team meetings, the team voiced to me that they wanted to feel, in order to feel trust with me, they wanted to know that I could tell them everything. Where and they wanted to know that for them, that was their definition of trust. And I had pointed out to them that as the leader here, there would be times when I would be pulled into confidential conversations where I could not share with the team what I knew because of my position. And what I did promise to the team was as much as I could share, I would. And then I also encourage members of my team to come ask me questions as well. And then sometimes I would also observe in team meetings that some people who reported to me have different communication styles. So, for example, I happen to be very verbal. And I also noticed that some of my teammates who reported to me were not very verbal, and they would feel kind of put on the spot. So one of the things I started doing was asking once in a while in a meeting, having us just spend a few minutes just writing down our thoughts before anybody shared their thoughts. And by doing this, I was hoping to be able to kind of accommodate those who felt maybe put on the spot to be asked, okay, so what do you think? And then other times it would be a matter of, to accommodate their style, having conversations with them outside of the team meetings one-on-one. So it was a combination of trying to set up an atmosphere where I sincerely wanted everyone to engage in the team meeting. And at the same time, I understood that some members who were not very verbal had a lot to contribute, and I wanted to know what that was. But I also knew that I couldn't put them on the spot and say, so tell me what you think, right? Like some people work in ways where they need to kind of go back to their desk, think about it, do some research. And then when they have that, then they're ready to present verbally. So that's an example of kind of being aware of different styles and trying to create that trust and psychological safety.
That's great. So let's go deeper into that, May, because clearly you had such a beautiful impact on this team, like the fact that folks were able to get very comfortable with you. So it sounds like you set a lot of a foundation with them outside of the spaces where, where everyone was together. So what do you think was really beneficial or supportive to folks feeling like they can really come to you or really share more of that when you were building that relationship with people?
I think being consistent with how I behaved, right, and what I did, I think that helped to build trust as well. I know the other times too, sitting in meetings, like one difficult meeting was that it was pointed out to me that I was bringing last minute requests, which would throw the team in turmoil because they were very professional in what they were doing. And it would throw them in turmoil because when you have a lot on your plate already, I had team members who are great at putting that together. But then if I'm throwing a last minute request into their schedule, that's kind of scattering everything else. So at one point in time in the meeting, they pointed out, okay, so it's not just my supervisor, but it was really me that they were talking about. And so I had to listen, and I had to say, okay, all right, I got to stop that. And then I became very much aware of that and would try my hardest not to give them last minute requests. And I believe that did improve because I didn't have that complaint going into the future. So that's the thing, as a leader, sometimes if you really are looking for your team to give you feedback, then you really have to listen and you have to take it to heart. Because everyone that I worked with, I knew that they wanted to do a good job. And as a leader, I feel that my responsibility was to help pull away roadblocks, not put them in there. So my last minute requests were putting roadblocks in front of my team members. And that was a relatively easy thing that I could do. And it was really all about boundaries. So that's the other thing about psychological safety, is having healthy boundaries and putting them into place. And sometimes being able to put healthy boundaries in place, it doesn't happen very smoothly. So you have to be willing to figure out what is the practice that will help either your manager be more aware and actually do it, or as a team, what you agree as a team that where you're going to hold each other accountable. So
Mm-hmm.
it's a combination of both. But
Yeah.
I kind of want to come. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
please. No,
Yeah.
please, May,
Well,
go ahead.
I actually want to come back to, there's a difference between when you're leading and there's a difference when you're a team member.
Mm,
Um, Sometimes when I'm coaching people and they are very conscientious about what's happening several levels above them, sometimes I have to point out, you know what? That's for the upper managers to figure out. It's not for you to figure out for them, even though you really want to help set things straight. So the best thing you can do is focus on where you can have agency to do what you need to do for your work that then kind of supports people higher up. And so sometimes it's a matter of, in terms of safety or trust, if it's something that's outside of your boundaries that you're not responsible for, I think it's a matter of letting people know you can let that go. You don't have to stress about that because it's not your position. What you can do is you can talk to your manager about what you're observing and maybe encourage the manager to share that with the higher ups sometimes. That
mm,
might be a way that could, again, it's a relatively easy way to begin building trust and psychological safety because it
mhm,
lets you know that your manager is willing to listen and is willing to lift up an issue that you have.
mm,
Then I want to talk about when you are not in the manager position, right? You know, you're in a position where maybe your manager or supervisor is showing a practice of not taking you seriously, or maybe you're feeling gaslit in the worst case scenario. I think for safety, it's a combination of looking at who on your team can you have allyship with to help you through it? Or is it something where you need to figure out, boy, do I need to stay in this position or do I need to stay with this organization? Or is there a way for you to perhaps maybe change to a different department or change to doing something else in another department if you want to stay in the organization? So there are different ways to try to move around to try to build more safety for you. Um, and it's very difficult because I know lots of times people will say, just go to HR. Well, unfortunately, HR is not there for you as the staffer. They're there for the organization. So I think for psychological safety and trust, sometimes if it's difficult to find it in the organization, you have to find a circle of people who will support you outside of the organization. Um, but best to case scenario is if you could find it both within and outside of the organization.
mhm, mhm. Oh, so much richness here, May. Thank you so much for sharing. And I want to center something that you're saying that's really important that I hope folks are listening to. And it connects back to why we're all here, right? If you were called to being here, hopefully part of it is also because you're curious about how are we going to do this meaningful work in our community and also preserve our well-being. And what you're talking about, May, here of what it sounds like you're asking people to really center themselves in these conversations, to really center their needs of having healthy boundaries, their needs of protecting their own psychological safety and energy. And for depending at wherever you are in your journey, but maybe for those of us who have been conditioned to feel like in order for us to give, in order for us to create this meaningful work, we have to be willing to sacrifice that. It's okay for us to give parts of ourselves because that's just the name of the game, right? How many times have we been told, well, it's just what you have to do. You got to earn your stripes, you know? And I want to call out Mark Travis Rivera, who's here in our audience, and he was having a wonderful conversation about this in his storytelling audio LinkedIn conversations, and it's about that of how many times we've been told that this is just what we need to do, and the reality is when we care and center ourselves and our well-being, we can do this work for a long time, and it doesn't allow us to get burnt out. So when we center ourselves here of creating healthy boundaries, right? Knowing what is important to us to make sure that we're feeling okay and that we're feeling good and that we can communicate that out. We have to acknowledge that there may not be spaces where we're always comfortable to do that, but then how are we setting up those boundaries for ourselves if they're not willing, if our organization or our managers aren't able to create those boundaries for us or not willing to respect it, then how do we still honor that for ourselves? And how are we continuing to go into that cycle of feedback with an open mind and open heart, realizing that no matter how they reflect or how they react to the feedback that you're sharing, that still does not depend or that is not connected to your worthiness of doing the work. Because when you build that self awareness of your work and your value, then the feedback, when you enter those feedback conversations, you can be more clear about what is important to you and how, regardless of what they say, you take it in, but you don't take it personal, right? And that's a huge part of this, of how we continue to, when we talk about building our trust, it's not just also building our trust with our community and our team, but also how are we building trust with ourselves? How are we building psychological safety with ourselves so we can trust ourselves to do this work, so we can feel good within ourselves to continue to do this work? And so I wanted to call that out because I think it's really important. What you're asking folks to think about is, where are you in these conversations? How are you taking care of yourself when you're asking to make this effort to build safety and psychological safety and trust for others, and where that lies? And so when we're thinking about that, you mentioned earlier, so what do you think is important for folks to really consider and think about in terms of building safety versus vulnerability, and what the difference is, how folks can like really identify, well, is this really a space that I feel safe, or is this just a space that I feel a bit vulnerable,
Yeah.
and it's okay for me to feel vulnerable?
Yeah, thank you for coming back to that. So when I say that there's a difference between vulnerability and safety, I'll give you some concrete examples. When I was interviewing with a company for a trainer position, during the interview, I was very young at the time, and I was actually pregnant, but I wasn't showing yet. And at one point in time, the interviewer has said to me, well, if you were a mom and you had a little one, we couldn't consider you, because the trainer position that I was interviewing for involved a lot of travel. About 60% of the job was travel. So I was not going to share the fact that I was pregnant, right? Because that would have been a completely vulnerable position to be in, and I most likely would not have gotten the job offer. Plus what they had actually said was illegal in the state of California. I ended up getting the position, and it wasn't until months later when I finally did announce that I was pregnant and that I would be taking maternity leave. The There were two people who were interviewing me, and it was a husband-wife combo. And one of them had said to me, "Why didn't you mention that you were pregnant? Because if we had known, we would have picked in addition to my position, they were hiring for another. So they were hiring for two trainers. They said, oh, for the other position, we would have picked a different person." So it was I just was not going to point out. I didn't say anything because you told me if I were a working mom, I wouldn't get the job like that. That is something, and I have seen that recently on a job board. There's a great list on Facebook called Albert's List that helps people search for jobs, not necessarily in nonprofits, but someone else had written saying, I'm in the process of interviewing, I'm thinking about getting pregnant, should I say something? And I piped in and said, absolutely not. You are not obligated to say anything about family planning, or let's say you're working for an organization and you're trying to figure out whether you want to have a family. Should you talk to your HR person? Should you not talk to the HR person? That's a level of vulnerability where you have to figure out um, whether you want to say something or not. I'll give you another example on the other side. I live in Valencia, Spain right now, and I knew over a year before we moved here that we were moving. I knew I couldn't say anything, even though I really wanted to give my organization a year of advance notice. And I did not do that because of vulnerability. It wasn't so much safety, but it was really more around vulnerability. We were in transition where the person I was reporting to was a temporary person. And I knew had I said something that I would be, because May won't be here a year from now, that I would be then removed from conversations that I needed to be in order to do my work. And sure enough, when I finally did say something 3 months before leaving, I had let HR know, like, hey, FYI, I wanted to say something earlier, but I couldn't. I just felt too vulnerable. And I felt that I would be basically not able to, I would not be invited into meetings where I needed to be as we were designing certain things. And sure enough, in practice, that's what happened. So sometimes safety and vulnerability, you are not obligated to say everything and anything about your life with work. Where I feel that you are, it would be great if you said something, is when you can assess what is the best thing for your career, right? So had there been a different person I was reporting to, possibly I could have made my announcement earlier and spent that time, if I had the trust that we could develop and design together from the time when I announced to the time when I left. But it's one of those things where it's very individual, and you really have to figure out and watch how people act and watch the practice. And that will help you figure out, that'll give you a clue. It won't always help you figure out, but at least that will give you a clue whether it is a place of safety or trust or not.
Oh, that's great. I like that. You're saying, before jumping to I hear you calling us in to really think about is before we jump to what we think we need to do or quote unquote should do. I don't
Mhm.
even use the word should. My therapist very early on in my healing journey told me, Manuela, anytime someone said you're about to use the word should, pause and stop and really think about, is this really serving me, or am I trying
Mhm.
to uphold something that is not serving me? Because
Yeah.
9 times out of 10, if we're using, I should probably say that, or I should probably, it really isn't to serve you or what's most intended for you. You're probably
Mhm.
trying to do that for someone else. So I've just cut out should out of my life completely. And it's actually really interesting the first couple months that you're doing that. You're like, wow, I say this a lot. So I say that all to say I like what you're calling us into is when we're making these really big decisions that we know are going to have huge implications to not only our career but our livelihood, something like you're
Mhm.
saying of parent planning, and our parents are, and then that decision maybe making it the employer giving them a reason for to give us less time, or just making it
Mhm.
more difficult, whatever
Mhm.
the implications may be. As there's always space that you always have the power to decide what's best for you. And so, May, let's talk a little bit more about that, because I think that's really powerful of in those really difficult circumstances when you're having to make these decisions over what is best for me versus what will the organization do? What is
Mhm.
your advice or thought around this of how can you prepare for these difficult conversations, and what is important to keep in mind when you're having them or presenting them back to your organization?
That's a great question. I would say when you're in a situation where you need to have a difficult conversation, I think number one is practicing that conversation with someone outside of the organization, not with somebody inside the organization, so that the person who is not in the organization can ask you questions, right? Like, or give you feedback. Hey, here's how it's coming across to me. Um, I think that it's very important to take a look at, um, for example, your career. So, and look at what are some of the possible outcomes of this conversation, right? If I have this conversation, am I suddenly going to be fired? California is an at-will state, and your employer can let you go with no reason whatsoever.
Mhm.
So there's that consider. That is always a possibility. The other possibility is, okay, do you have the trust where if you put together a proposal, which I did, about continuing to work for the organization, but then finding out, and so my request was taken very seriously, and then it came back that the organization just wasn't set up to employ someone based out of the U.S. because of for labor reasons that I found out later. Many U.S. organizations are not set up to employ people outside of the country because for labor
Mhm.
relations, if you have better, for example, in living in Europe, if 6 weeks is a minimum vacation, guess what? My organization based in the US is going to have to give me 6 weeks minimum vacation or
Mhm.
whatever other labor laws or benefits. So that's part of the reason why you may or may not see people in your organization living outside of the country. I mean, there are organizations that have set up where they can do it, but not every organization has. The other thing I would say too is, as you had mentioned earlier, looking at what is the most important aspect for your own career. So coming back to me, I have been in situations where I knew that, for example, if I needed to leave or if I needed to make a request about moving into a different department, what would it always came back to, is this a good move for me in my career, whether it's leadership development, whether it's developing expertise in the work that I do? That should always be your first thought because your employer is not, even though they want your loyalty, they're not always going to be loyal to you either. And so
Mhm.
they're looking after their best interest. Um, and so the thing is, if you, what was it? Somebody said a really great thing to me one time. If you can think of yourself as your own company, what is in the best interest for your own company? Right. And if that
Mhm.
means you, in having a hard conversation, you want to provide some alternatives for your employer to think about and maybe possibly consider that they might not have considered before, as long as you can make it a win-win for both you first as well as your employer, there you have a stronger um, foundation to stand on. And so that's where I think it's very difficult to do it by yourself. I think it's really important to kind of pull your allies, um, your loved ones, get all kinds of feedback. What are some potentials? I mean, there can be a downside, right? You might get like 6 different sets of feedback, and now you're even more confused. What should I do? And lots of times I would say, just listen to your gut. Which
Mhm.
which path makes you smile? Which path makes your heart sing?
Mhm.
Because it's funny, right before we came on, I was reading an article about how with, the princess in England, uh, Kate, having
Mhm.
cancer, there has been this alarming trend over the past couple of decades. Younger and younger people are coming down with cancer, and
Mhm.
now doctors are having to screen for that. And where is the cancer coming from? I mean, stress is huge. So that's why self-care is so, so important to your health. And building up your community to help you with self-care. Because when you think about it, it's easy for you to give self-care tips and recommendations to your friend. But then when you have to turn around and do it to yourself, it's always, like you said earlier, oh, I have this to do, I have that to do, I'll put it to the side, right? This is my expectation. This is my assumption. Nobody likes a dead hero, what I call a dead hero. And a dead hero, the definition is when you see something that needs to be done, it's not necessarily your job. And you're like, oh, I'll step in to help. And when you help and you do something extra, it's not that you get accolades for doing extra. Instead, people will point out, oh, wait, you're doing this, but you're short here and you're short there. And suddenly you're now this dead hero because you're so busy trying to help save the day that you're not thinking of saving yourself.
Mm.
And that's part of our ingrained white supremacist. And it's not just white supremacy. I mean, I've had it in the different communities that I've worked with. And I actually had one person who I reported to who had gave me a welcome card. And the most shocking thing was literally they gave me a welcome card with a couple of gifts. One of them were toy handcuffs because this person wanted me to understand that I was going to be handcuffed to my job.
Wow,
And
that's not a red flag.
yeah, so
Oh my.
yeah. So, what do you say to that, to someone who's older than you of your community? Inside, I was thinking, okay, I need to get out of this job as soon as I can, where I'm not hurting my reputation. But yeah, that's not the type of leadership I should be reporting to. That's not the type of leadership I want to show my people who are reporting to me. And so it was a huge, huge red flag. And at the same time, I was not going to call out this person in front of colleagues when they presented this to me. They thought it was okay. It was not okay. It's got to be one of the most shocking things that I have ever experienced.
Wow. Wow, wow,
And so if
wow.
you're a leader out there, do not do that to
Yeah. Oh,
people you
please.
work
If
with.
there's one thing you learned from this conversation, before you give any types of handcuffs, really think about, is that the culture I want to perpetuate? And you said it, and I mean, I do think it's important to acknowledge you brought up white supremacy culture. White supremacy culture is definitely perpetuating the harms in the environment for this work to be. And but also the feeling that we have, that obligation that we feel of having to consistently give at the sacrifice of our own well-being. That's, I think that comes from being heart-centered, community value-centered people. And I think a lot of us are that. Like, you would not be going into nonprofits or, philanthropy if there isn't some piece of you that, deeply wants to make this world a little bit better. And so that's okay, and those things can exist. That it's important to have that. That's what drives us. That's our passion. That's our fire. And also at the same time, when that gets that covers, or that puts of rose-colored glasses on everything we do, and we ignore what beautiful our incredible Maya Angelou would say, is when someone shows you who they are, believe them the
Yeah.
first time. Like, we need
Yeah.
to believe them. If we are seeing major red flags, especially during the interview process, of they're asking us questions that, are a little a little nervous. It's important for us to be really thoughtful of that, as much as we may very much need that job. And again, respectfully understanding everyone's different circumstances and not everyone having the privilege to be as choosing. But I think this is the conversation that we're having here. It's like, we do all have the privilege to choose what is most supportive for us. And if we do have choose to stay in an environment that isn't serving us, or we do choose to take a job that we know may be a little bit of a toxic environment, and because we don't have a choice in that moment, or we feel as though we don't, then what else are we doing for ourselves in those environments to make sure that we're okay? And it's really, really critical here. It's that balance of the responsibility we're putting on our employers to make sure that we're creating an environment that allows us to thrive, and also the individual responsibility that we each have to take and own of our own journey, and what we can do in that path to make sure that we are continuing to center ourselves, because no one's going to care for us more than ourselves. I
Mhm.
learned that the hard way. As much as you want to care and believe that in other people, yeah, you may have the best intended people around you, but at the end of the day, to everything that you're saying, the company is the company. They're going to be only loyal to themselves. HR is only going to be
Mhm.
loyal to themselves.
Mhm.
Respectfully, I love some HR folks, but that there's always a lot of that. And so you have to be really gentle. And I love these tips that you shared. Know the laws, be prepared, get different perspectives. But at the end of the day, center what's most important to
Mhm.
you.
Mhm.
Make sure, and I love working with clients on this. That's why I deeply use values as such a core to the
Mhm.
work that I do. Know your values, know what you stand for, know what you believe in. Before we jump off, May, there's a final question before we get to the last question I ask all our speakers. But you mentioned something so fun, that you are at such a fun place in your career and in your life, and you're trying to explore what it looks like to, what it sounds like, really live fully and living abroad and experiencing life. So, do you mind sharing with our audience a bit about that? What that experience
Sure.
has been like, living abroad and sharing and trying to continue to grow your career, or start your consulting practice, for
Mhm.
folks that are interested and curious about wanting to live in other places? What would you recommend for them to think about before, while they're in that space?
That's a great question. I would say I just kind of jumped into this. I mean, I have lived abroad before. I once taught for 4.5 years at graduate school in Japan. And so I was a visiting full-time professor. This time was different because I had left without having really, I mean, I only had a couple of clients all set up before I left the US. So the advice that I would give is, you definitely can be living abroad while you work. So the key is making sure that you have set up clients and the relationships so that people will think of you and trust that you can work with them. It was very interesting because new people I was meeting in the US before I left, because I could see that because I was not based there, it was very difficult for them to get their head wrapped around, like, how is it going to work? And so I happen to be a night owl. So a lot of my work gets done in the evening time and into the early mornings, depending on what time the schedule is, because I do work on US time. So I'm 9 hours, in general, 9 hours ahead of West Coast time, 6 hours ahead of East Coast time. And I would say that number one, you would have to take a look at what are your needs budget wise for living abroad.
Mm.
Um, And so there are other nonprofit folks I know of. I have a colleague who she's just my inspiration, and she just took off and then started, you know, had different clients and she's been doing a lot of traveling, and she's been making it work. And it's a lot of juggling sometimes, but it is something that you can do. I've had other people talk to me about what I recommended. One of them was, depending on where you're looking to go, are you looking to live there for a year? There are different visas, like a digital nomad visa. So you have to take a look at both your budget and what are the visa requirements in order for you to live and work in that country. And so it depends whether you're hired full time by an organization in that country or whether you leave as a consultant. But
Mm.
there are many people who do it. And so it's something that wasn't really on my radar, even though I had lived abroad before and
Oh,
worked.
that's so magical. No, I love it, and I wanna highlight that because it's a really special part of you and your experience of what you can share with folks, and also I love for us to really think this is a great example of, like, thinking outside the box, thinking of if you've ever been curious or wanting to explore that part of you, or but always been fearful of what that could look like, and it feeling like that's just not who I am, or I don't have the privilege to be able to do that. There is a way. There's always a way. If it's something that deeply matters to you, I want to
Mhm.
invite you to even begin to explore it. Contact May and see what her experiences are. And as she shared, there's so much experience and opportunity out there for us to make these things happen. We just have to go a little bit outside on the cliff and really go for it and try. Oh my gosh. Well, I can't believe we're almost at time, but I want to ask you the question I ask all of our guests that's so important to me is it's really connected back to con fuerza. And as I shared, living a life con fuerza is about reclaiming our inner power to live in alignment to our values. And so I want to ask you, May, how are you choosing to live a life con fuerza? And what is living a life con fuerza? And in English, it means with strength. What does that mean to you?
I think that's a wonderful question to end on. Um, Living a life with strength, for me, I'm in my early 60s. In fact, I celebrated my birthday yesterday. I turned 62.
Yeah.
My
Okay.
mom missed her, thank you. My mom missed her 44th birthday. She died before she turned 44. She had cancer. And so every day that I live a life of adventure that she could never have. And I
Mm,
have this life based on standing on her shoulders, my grandmother's shoulders, my great grandmother's shoulders. And so it's very important for me to be living a life where I'm taking care of myself as much as I'm taking care of my family and friends.
mm,
And it is something that is very difficult to do when you're in the middle of raising children, when you're in the middle of trying to create your career. But I promise that if you commit to carving out some time for yourself, that by the time one of my favorite questions I came across my Facebook feed a few years ago was, when you turn 75, what do you want to say that you um, that you did, right? Versus like when you turn 75, what don't you want to be disappointed about? So for
mm,
me, it was my writing. I had a couple of manuscripts that were here and there. None of them finished. And I thought to myself, okay, when I turn 75, I want to have finished both manuscripts. I want to have worked on getting them published. Because if I turn 75 and I didn't do that, I would be disappointed. It would be something that I didn't get to do. And there's no reason why. And it's something that I'm passionate about. So I would say for strength, that's the more time I can spend on that passionate thing that I'm involved with, the better.
that's beautiful. Thank
Thank
you,
you.
thank you, thank you so much. We honor you, your story, your legacy, everything that you share with us. Thank you so much, May, for being here. I'm so deeply grateful to be in conversation with you and to be able to share your wisdom this Wednesday with our communities. Is there another way, other ways that folks can stay connected to you? Is there anything you
Sure.
would want to share as, anything you may be offering or anything you would like the
Yeah.
community to know about?
Yeah. Thank you so much, first of all, for having me. And I love that you're doing these Wisdom Wednesdays. Um, in in the month of May, I've committed to launching a blog about my experiences, and people can connect with me on my bluequilt.com, which is my website, or they could look me up on LinkedIn. And I'm happy to help answer questions. I'm happy to share what I've learned, and so yeah, I guess that's what I would say.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
May. I'm so happy, and I can't wait to read your blogs and to share it out with our communities. For those of you who didn't hear about who weren't here last week or haven't watched the recording, I'm excited to launch our resource library with Wisdom Wednesdays. It's a free library accessible to all of you that shares all of the recordings of each of the Wisdom Wednesdays conversations, as well as wonderful resources such as May's blog that will be available with each of the episodes. And so if you haven't already done so, check out the comments. I'm going to post the link down there. and you'll have access to all of that. And so thank you again, May, for being here. Thank you all who stayed on live to watch us or are watching us after in a recording. I can't wait for you to join us hopefully next in 2 weeks on April 10th, where we're going to be sitting with Karan Moody Harden, and we're going to talk about leading with grace and what it means to lead with grace. So really excited to be in conversation with Karan on April 10th. I hope you'll join us. And thank you once again, May. I hope everyone has a supportive and nurturing Wednesday. Un abracito. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you for having me.